To me, these days riding Russian public transport is boring. Didn't used to be that way. When I arrived back in the year 2001, it was crazy. I'll tell you about it. Russia, then and now. Russia was a lot different back in 2001 when I first arrived. Now, when I first arrived, I came to Chelyabinsk, and I lived the first 17 years I was in Russia. I lived in Chelyabinsk. Now, Chelyabinsk doesn't have a very good reputation in Russia. It's rather, it has a reputation as a very polluted, industrialized city. There's actually a Russian television program, I guess, kind of a comedy program, that part of it each week or part of it every now and then deals with Chelyabinsk in a funny manner. Well, even Meg, Brian, and Stewie from Family Guy in America, they had a whole episode based around the city of Chelyabinsk. But I'll tell you, how many of you have ever lived in a city where a large meteorite exploded over the city, injuring thousands of people? Well, I have. Chelyabinsk, 2013. Cool experience. I have to say, I actually enjoyed most of my time in Chelyabinsk. I had a lot of friends there and a lot of co-workers. Our daughters were born. They actually attended school there up through the eighth grade. However, when I got there in the year 2001, public transport required how can I call it, a degree of bravery that was difficult to muster for a newly arrived immigrant, especially one with very little experience with public transport anywhere. I wasn't working when I first arrived in Russia, but just sitting at home, well, that grew pretty old. I mean, there I was, watching video tapes or reading books. And yes, I was actually studying Russian back then because I know if you you would be wondering, maybe that would have been a better use of my time. So I decided I would explore different parts of the city by public transport, uh, just something I could do on my own. Now, back in those days, unlike now, there were no marshutki. And for my Western viewers, marshutki are, well, they're just regular sized vans that hold, they're usually privately held. They hold about 13 seats. They have a number on them and they go on a prescribed route around the city all day. Back then, there weren't many. Uh, Later, of course, they were like flies on, well, they're like flies, they're everywhere. But back in 2001, the main form of transport, ground transport in Chelyabinsk, were the big lumbering buses. I recall my first time alone deciding to take bus number 64 into the city center. I wanted to leave at the same time as my wife, only I would go to the bus stop, she'd go to the car. She would gladly have taken me into the city, but no, I wanted to do this on my own by bus. If I'd been a little smarter, I would have waited till after 9 o'clock when most of rush hour had died down and most of the students were already at their universities. But no, I wasn't smart. All of these big lumbering buses back then were made by a company called, well, in Russian they say Icarus, in English we say Icarus. They were made in Hungary and they were sold all over the former Soviet Union. I believe a lot of them came in Chelyabinsk came from Eastern Germany after reunification. I guess they just didn't meet standards after reunification. Big yellow lumbering buses. Now, the name of Icarus doesn't exactly bring in a feeling of safety into my heart. I mean, if you remember correctly, the tale, Icarus and his father escaped from the Isle of Crete. They escaped using bird feathers stuck to their body using wax. Icarus's father, Daedalus, said, don't go too close, don't fly too high because you'll be too close to the sun and the wax will melt. Okay, no sooner than they take off, then of course, where's Icarus? He's on his way up towards the sun. And what happens? Well, the feathers melt. off of his body. He falls tumbling into the sea where he died. Stupid boy. Should have listened to his father. Now, I don't know about you, but I probably wouldn't have chosen this name for a bus company if I were if I were the owner. I've never in my life experienced such packed transport as I did back in the days in 2001. It was actually a bus made of two segments connected by like a flexible joint, so the front and the back could kind of move independently around corners. Okay, so here I am back in 2001, waiting for the bus to come. I can see it coming out of a side road, turning down my main road, and it's leaning. It's leaning because it's packed with people. There's so many people, they're not evenly distributed, and the bus is leaning. I'm already getting scared. As it stopped at my bus stop, the doors opened, and people were popping out, pop, pop, pop. Three different doors, pop, 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 pop. They weren't popping out because they were ready to get off the bus. They're popping out just due to pressure in there. It's so packed in there that as soon as the doors open, they're popping out because also people are pushing, trying to get out. So they pop out, people get off, they try to slide back in, not just them, but now there's about 15 additional people trying to get in on that bus. They're pushing and shoving and everything else. Now it's time for the doors to close. Well, they can't. They keep closing, hitting, opening, closing, opening. You figured at that point, whoever the door was hitting, you would think they'd finally just give up and say, okay, the bus can't leave because I'm in the way. But no, somehow they work out some magical contortions and they get on that bus and the doors close. The bus leaves, even more packed with people, leaving to get to the next station where it'll go through all these same gyrations all over again. I was not one of the people who got on the bus. I decided I'll stand here. I'll wait. Now, the packing of the bus was a rather interesting thing to watch, as long as you weren't one of the people being packed onto the bus. I'd say a lot of the bus riders were pensioners or university age students at that time of day, although all different ages were represented, not just these two. From my vantage point, anyhow, the only way that they could possibly fit anybody else on there, because you'd see these girls, they're dressed up like models, stiletto heels, looking all pretty, but boy, they could scrap like the best of them. What I thought might happen is maybe the girls would jump up, like crowd diving at a concert, and people would just pass them back the bus over their head. But it's my imagination working. I never actually saw that happen. Anyhow, I said I didn't get on the bus, and I didn't get on the bus. I probably waited about another hour until the buses that were coming through weren't totally packed. They were still crowded, but not jam packed. And then I finally decided, well, if Babushki can get on this bus, and if these young students can get on the bus, I, as a healthy middle aged male, can probably also get on the bus. And I did. Once I got on the bus, of course, there's no way that you're going to get a seat. You look around, and it's in all the seats, it's all taken up by the babushki, you know. And you think, well, that's the way it should be. They should let the older people sit down. Until it dawns on you a little bit. You say, wait a minute, this is 7:30 in the morning. What are they doing on the bus? I mean, here in Russia at that time, the only two places babushki went is they either went to the Rynek, which is outdoor markets, to compare prices, or they went to the post office for some reason that I don't know. Those are the only two places they would go. But here they were on the bus, taking up all the seats. I couldn't figure that one out. Finally dawned on me. At that time, I don't know about today, here in Russia, there's really no place or nothing done for older people. There's not like elderly centers or anything of that nature. So, but they do get a free transport pass. So they don't sleep anyhow, or they sleep very little. So I guess they just get up early and that's their entertainment, riding the bus around all day long. So at least that was my thought. Wintertime on the same bus, that was really quite the experience. You had just as many people who wanted to get on the bus, just as many people riding, but now they're wearing heavy outer clothing because it's very, very cold in Chelyabinsk, extremely cold, you know, minus 30, So the packing was every bit as harsh, but it wasn't as bad because there was a little bit of padding. People's coats would pad you, so it wasn't so much bone against bone. Now, Russia has a reputation of being a very cold country. So you'd figure Russia, at least one thing they must have down pat is how to heat things. But you'd be wrong. If you go into a Russian home, it's quite warm. It's so warm you have to strip down to your shorts. It's warm enough to breed sheep. But if you're in a Russian car or Russian transport, it's cold as hell. So no, no, they don't know how to handle heat. These buses, inside the buses, it was just like being outdoors, except there was no wind. That was about the only difference. So you get all these people packed, and here's the problem. Now, well, first of all, forget about ever getting a seat. But let's say you did get a seat. You'd want a window seat. And the reason why you want a window seat is because the window is totally frozen. If you have a window seat, you can use your thumb or a finger to melt a little porthole for you to look out and see where you are. Or I used to carry around a little like an old credit card and scrape with that. Okay, but that's if you have a seat, which, like I said, that's like finding a unicorn. It doesn't happen. So I had to come up with methods of knowing when to get off the bus. I couldn't see out the window, and that's how you usually know. They did have a loudspeaker and announcements, but the speakers were so bad in those old buses that not even Russians could understand what they were saying. You'd hear something like this, which is the next stop is, and then just you can't understand a thing. It's much better now. They use like recordings, much better. So I came up with two different methods. One of them was I knew where I got on the bus and where I wanted to get off the bus was 9 bus stops away. So I would just watch the doors, accordion type doors, open 9 times. So after it opened 8 times, I'd start to assault my way back towards the door so I could pop out when the door opened. That was one way. Problem with that way is that sometimes your mind wandered around a little bit. You're thinking about things, and it's, oh my God, I don't know how many times it's opened. All right, well, here's Icarus bus to the rescue. Remember, I said it's like jointed, you know. So if I just looked forward up that bus, when the thing made a sharp turn, I could tell because half the bus was, well, turned. Half, if I'm in the back, the other half hasn't. So I knew that to get to where I wanted to go, where I'd watch a thing flex right at one point, left shortly thereafter, right again further up, then left. And after it flexed that last left, it was time for me to get off the bus. So yeah, even without any other way, you still find a way of orienting yourself. I've actually often thought, well, not often, but sometimes thought that I'd love to check eBay or something else to see if I could buy like these. You don't see these old Icarus buses around anymore. They've been replaced by nice new ones, nice new Russian made buses. But I'd love to buy a seat from one of those Icarus buses so I could put that in my backyard and know that I could sit on my bus seat anytime I wanted. I think that'd be cool. If you know where I can get an Icarus bus seat, please tell me. I'd be interested. I'm sorry, but there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, and that's how you paid for your ride. Well, on the bus, you had a person. It was very often an older woman, maybe even older, angry woman. She was called a, well, in Russian, they would say conductor, or in English, we just say conductor. She had a roll of paper tickets, and you pay her the money. She'd tear off one of these tickets and give it to you. Okay, but remember, a lot of times you get on this bus, it's so packed. How can She can't walk down through the bus. There's no space to walk. It was just a system that went on. It kind of amazed me the first few times I saw it. You'd walk on the bus, you'd see where the conductor was, you'd take your money out. Let's say back then it was 3 rubles. So you'd take out your 3 rubles, or maybe you didn't have it, you had a 10 ruble note. You take your 10 ruble note, you hand it to the person in front of you. They would keep handing it up front till it came to the conductor. Conductor would then take the 10 ruble note, take a ticket and 7 rubles, and pass it to the person they just got it from all the way back. And that ticket and change would come back to you. And I had that happen every time. And the whole time I was there, I saw this. It amazed me. Never once did I see the money disappear in somebody's pocket or any confusion or anything of the like. I was amazed. And that was one of the first times that I looked around me. I said, I really like Russian people. There's not many other places that that would work at, not in the world. Well, I've talked a lot more than I had intended to about my bus experiences 23 years ago, and let me spare you the suspense. Things have changed a lot for the better. For the most part, the transport is all reasonably new, although at rush hour you may very well be standing. I've not seen any more of the type of people packing which used to occur. And there are terminals mounted throughout the bus, which you scan your transport card or even your debit card, and this is how you pay. No more, no more conductors. I hope that you've enjoyed my little stories about riding public transport way back then. Until next time, пока.